The air in the outpost haven tasted of burnt metal and fear. Sirens wailed a constant, panicked scream. Jinwoo Park crouched behind a shattered console, his rifle hot in his hands. Across the corridor, Sumin Kim slapped a fresh bio-seal on a wounded soldier's arm, her face tight with focus. "Evac is at 50%. A voice crackled over the command channel. "Rear guard. Hold the line at Sector Gamma for 3 more minutes. 3 minutes. It might as well be 3 hours." The enemy, the Hollow, was not like any foe they had faced. They were silent, a shifting tide of black, chitinous metal and pale, pulsing flesh. They didn't shoot. They absorbed. Where they passed, only a slick, fused residue remained of people and machines. "Moving!" Jinwoo yelled, and sprinted to the next barricade. Sumin was right behind him, dragging the wounded soldier. Bolts of plasma from Cthar warriors flashed over their heads, sizzling into the advancing dark mass. The Cthar were insectoid allies, tall and sharp-angled, their mandibles clicking in a language of war. Their leader, Tae-san, gestured with a clawed hand. "The west corridor is lost. Fall back to the hangar. Now!" The group, a mix of human and Cthar soldiers, moved as one battered unit. They fought their way back through the maze of Haven's corridors, every step costing bullets, energy, and lives. They burst into the vast main hangar. The last 2 transport ships sat there, their engines whining with a rising pitch. Civilians and injured were being pushed up the ramps in a frantic, orderly rush. Jinwoo saw Yuna Lee there. The young engineer was not rushing onto a ship. Instead, she was helping an older woman limp forward, her face smeared with grease and dust. Their eyes met for a second, and Jinwoo gave a sharp nod towards the ship. "Go." She nodded back, turning to guide the woman. That was when the world exploded. The hangar's main blast door, designed to seal in a catastrophe, shuddered. A deafening crunch echoed through the bay as something huge slammed into it from outside. The metal groaned, and a long, jagged split appeared down its center. "They are here! Seal the inner doors!" Tae-san bellowed. Smaller emergency doors, like giant metal teeth, began to slide down from the ceiling at every entrance to the hangar. One was closing over the entrance to a secondary storage bay. Jinwoo's eyes went to the status panel beside it. It showed a live feed from inside the bay. A dozen civilians, workers, and staff who had been securing data cores were trapped. They were pounding on the door from the inside. Yuna must have just come from there. On the main hangar side, a young Cthar warrior stood by the door controls, ready to lock it. "Wait!" Jinwoo shouted, but his voice was lost in another crash against the main door. Tae-san skidded to a stop by the control panel. He looked at the feed, his large, dark eyes taking in the terrified humans. He looked at the main door, buckling inward with each thunderous blow. He made a calculation, cold and swift. "The storage bay door is compromised," Tae-san stated, his voice a hard click. "If we open it, or if it fails, the hollow vectors will flood into this hangar. They will reach the transports. We will all be lost." He placed a claw on the young warrior's arm. "They are already lost. Seal it. Protect the many." The young Cthar moved to obey. "No!" This time, Jinwoo's roar cut through the noise. He shoved forward, putting himself between the Cthar and the controls. He looked straight at Tae-san. "We can get them out. We blow the door mechanism. Pull them through." Tae-san's mandibles spread in a gesture of pure fury. "You risk hundreds for a dozen? It is a poor trade, human. The math is clear." "It's not math," Jinwoo snarled. On the feed, he saw a woman holding a child. He saw an old man bracing a desk against the door. He saw Yuna, now back inside the bay, using a tool to try and weld a support strut. She was fighting to save them. She hadn't left them. The main hangar door shrieked. A black, metallic tendril, wet and sharp, pierced through the split, probing the air. Panic surged through the hangar. The loading of the transports turned into a stampede. Tae-san pointed a sharp claw at the feed screen. "Look, they are dead already. Your emotion will kill us all. Leave them inside." The The plea was desperate, logical, and final. To Tae-san, it was the only way. Sacrifice the few to save the species. It was the Kthar way. Jin-woo looked at the piercing tendril, at the screaming civilians on the screen, at the determined set of Sumin's jaw as she readied her medkit beside him. He saw his grandfather's face, etched with a permanent cold, speaking of friends who became ice statues on a forgotten hill that he thumbed his comms. Sumin, get a shape charge. We're opening this door. He turned back to the furious alien warrior. His voice was low but absolute. No. The word hung in the smoky air, solid and unyielding as a rock. Tae-san stared at Jin-woo, his compound eyes reflecting the flashing emergency lights. They did not show confusion, only a cold, furious clarity. The human had chosen a path of collective death. Jin-woo did not wait for a debate. He turned his back on the alien commander, a profound insult in Kthar culture. Sumin, the charge now! He barked into his comms. Sumin was already moving. She shoved her medkit at a nearby soldier and sprinted towards the engineering locker near the hangar wall. Her mind, trained for triage, ran a different calculation. Risk of death now versus certain death for 12. The math was simple. She ripped open the locker in the storage bay. The world had become a nightmare of noise and shaking metal. Yuna Lee dropped her welding tool as the entire structure trembled. The lights flickered, casting jerking shadows of the trapped civilians huddled behind overturned crates. Are they sealing us in? A man cried, his voice cracking. Yuna looked at the status panel on their side of the door. It showed the external command. Final lock, engaged. Her heart sank. Then she saw it change. The command signal blinked out. A new manual override was being input. A human signature. No, she said, her voice suddenly strong. They're not. They're coming. Get ready to run. When that door opens, you go straight for the closest ship. Don't look back. Outside, Sumin slapped the magnetic charge onto the upper hinge of the heavy door. Fire in the hole, she yelled, sprinting back to cover. The shaped charge blew with a sharp, contained crack. Metal screamed as the door, now unbalanced, twisted in its frame, leaving a jagged, 2-foot gap at the top. It was not a clean entrance. It was a killing funnel. Go, 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 Jin-woo shouted, planting himself at the base of the twisted door, his rifle aimed into the dark corridor beyond the storage bay. The first civilian, the old man, was boosted up by others and wriggled through the gap. Sumin and a human soldier pulled him down on the other side and pointed him towards the ships. Run! Then the hollow came. They had sensed the breach, the new opening. Not through the main door, but from the ventilation shafts connected to the storage bay. A skittering, clicking sound echoed from the darkness behind the civilians. Pale, multi-legged forms, the size of dogs, made of fused bone and wire, poured into the storage bay from a shattered grate. Screams erupted. Jin-woo saw one of the creatures leap, sinking needle-like mouthparts into a woman's leg. She fell, dragged back into the shadows. Covering fire, Jin-woo roared and unleashed a stream of plasma bolts into the bay. The shots tore into the creatures, which burst with a wet, acidic pop. But for every one that fell, 2 more scrambled out. Tae-san watched, his body rigid. His warriors looked to him, their weapons ready. His order to help never came. This was the human's folly. Let him drown in it. He focused his own weapon on the main hangar door, where the probing tendril was now joined by a second. Prying the breach wider, the evacuation became a chaotic blur. Jin-woo fired until his rifle's heat sink glowed red. Sumin stopped being a medic and became a soldier, shooting with one hand while pulling a sobbing child through the gap with the other. Yuna was the last in the bay, shoving a teenage boy up towards the opening. A spiked limb shot out of the darkness, spearing the boy through the shoulder. He screamed, pinned. Yuna froze for a second, then grabbed a fallen piece of rebar. With a cry of pure rage, she swung it like a bat, hitting the limb with a solid clang. It recoiled, and Jinwoo's next shot severed it. The boy fell through the gap, and Sumin caught him. Yuna now! Jin-woo shouted. Yuna jumped, scrambling up the twisted metal. A creature lunged for her ankle. A plasma bolt from Jinwoo's rifle vaporized its head mere inches from her foot. He reached down, grabbed the collar of her engineer's suit, and hauled her through with a brutal heave. They tumbled together onto the hangar floor. Jinwoo looked back into the storage bay. It was a seething mass of hollow constructs. No one was left alive in there. They had saved 8. They had lost 4. But they had paid a far greater price. The diversion, the noise, the energy signatures, it had all been a beacon. While they fought at the small door, the hollow had concentrated on the big one. With a final, ear-splitting shriek of tearing metal, the main hangar door gave way. A wall of blackness, studded with clicking limbs and glowing, sensor-like eyes, flooded into the hangar. The last transport ship, its ramp still open, pilot screaming for everyone to get on, began its liftoff sequence. It was their only way out. Panicked soldiers and the rescued civilians sprinted for it. The ship rose, its engines glowing. A hollow tendril, whip-fast, lashed out and wrapped around one of its landing struts. The ship lurched, yawing dangerously to one side. From the pilot's seat, a desperate maneuver was made. The ship's defensive thrusters fired in a short, violent burst, scorching the hangar floor and severing the tendril. The ship wobbled, then shot towards the open sky through the hangar roof doors. It left behind Jinwoo, Sumin, Yuna, 3 other human soldiers, Tae-san, and his 2 remaining Kthar warriors. They were now completely cut off, the hangar filling with the enemy. The rising transport, its hull scarred and one engine sputtering, disappeared into the clouded sky. The roar of its engines faded, replaced by the hungry, clicking silence of the hollow as it advanced towards the small group huddled by the ruined storage door. Tae-san turned slowly from watching their escape vanish. He looked at Jinwoo, at the human's heaving chest and smoke-stained face. He did not say, "I told you so." His silence was far worse. It was the silence of a death sentence, officially signed. He simply looked at the sealed outer blast doors of the hangar, now in enemy hands, and then back at Jinwoo. The meaning was clear. Because of Jinwoo's choice, no one was getting out. They were all inside now. The hangar was lost. The last sound of the fleeing transport ship faded into a deep, ringing silence, broken only by the wet clicks and scrapes of the hollow as it moved through the shadows. The great doors were a ruin, a gaping mouth of twisted metal letting in the planet's dull gray light. Jinwoo's ears buzzed. He could smell burned insulation, plasma residue, and the sickly sweet odor of the enemy. He looked at the small group left behind. Sumin, breathing hard, her hand pressed to the seeping graze on her arm. 3 other human soldiers, their faces pale under the grime. Yuna, the engineer, her eyes wide but her jaw set, and Tae-san with his 2 remaining Kthar warriors, standing apart like statues of judgment. Tae-san broke the silence. His voice was a cold, precise instrument. The West Service Corridor. It is the only path not yet fully consumed. It leads to the lower levels. We will find defensible ground there to make our final stand. He did not look at Jinwoo. He spoke as if giving a report on the weather. No1 argued. There was no other option. They moved as a single, battered unit, fleeing deeper into the dying outpost. The corridors here were darker, lit only by emergency strips casting a bloody red glow. Alarms still blared somewhere far away, a lonely, unanswered cry. They passed scenes of horror. Rooms where furniture and equipment had been fused into strange, organic-looking lumps. Walls streaked with dark, hardened residue. They did not see bodies. The hollow left no bodies, only its art. Finally, they reached a heavy security door marked Geothermal Control, authorized personnel only. The locking mechanism was melted, but the door itself was thick and intact. Together, humans and Kthar shoved it open just enough to slip inside, then pushed it closed behind them. The room was small, full of dead control panels and silent monitor screens. A single light flickered on the ceiling. It was a tomb, but for now, it was their tomb. The moment the door sealed, the tension that had held them together snapped. Tae-san turned on Jinwoo. 8, he clicked, the word sharp as a knife. You saved 8. And in doing so, you killed the escape for 9. You condemned my warriors. You condemned your own. For what? A feeling? Jinwoo leaned his rifle against a console, his movements tired. We got 8 people out. And left 9 to die. Tayson's mandibles flared. Your sentiment is a weakness. It is a cancer. It infected the mission and now it has killed it. One of the human soldiers, a young man named Min Su, spoke up, his voice shaky. He's right, Sarge. We could be on that ship. The other humans looked down, the terrible thought hanging in the air. Sumin winced as she applied a fresh seal to her own arm. And the 4 in the storage bay? Should we just have listened to their screams while we flew away? Is that what we are? It is what you must be to survive, Taysan insisted, stepping closer. The universe is cold. It does not care for your right thing. It only respects strength and logic. Your logic failed. Jinwoo finally looked at him. Your logic wanted to leave a young engineer and a child to be turned into more of those things. Your logic sounds a lot like the Hollow's logic. Take what is useful, consume the rest. Taysan went very still. The comparison was the worst insult imaginable. Before he could retort, Yuna spoke from the corner. She was studying a dead control panel, her fingers tracing the lines of a physical wiring diagram etched on its surface. This isn't helping, she said, not looking at them. We are alive. For now. The geothermal plant below us has its own separate ventilation. The air is still flowing. That means there might be other ways. Her words were a bucket of cold water. The argument died, replaced by a desperate, hungry focus. All eyes turned to her. What ways? Jinwoo asked. Yuna shook her head. I don't know yet. These systems are old. Pre-outpost. They were built when they tapped the planet's heat. There could be maintenance tunnels, exhaust shafts, maybe even old drill conduits that lead away from here. She looked up, her face smudged but determined. But I need time. And quiet. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of defeat, but of a fragile, desperate hope. Taysan looked from Yuna to the sealed door, behind which the enemy surely gathered. His fury was not gone, but it was banked, buried under the pressing need for the next step that he gave a curt click to his warriors. They took up positions by the door, listening. The humans did the same, checking their few remaining power cells and supplies. Jinwoo sat on the floor, his back against a cold metal wall. He looked at his hands. They were trembling slightly, not from fear but from the crash after the adrenaline. He had made the call. He owned the consequences. He saw the doubt in Minsu's eyes, the pain in Sumin's, the terrifying calculation in Tayson's. He had traded a sure escape for a doomed last stand and a whisper from an engineer. He closed his eyes. For a moment he was not in the control room. He was listening to his grandfather's voice, rough as stone, telling a story about a hill so cold your breath turned to ice, and how the silence afterward was the loudest sound he had ever heard. Jinwoo opened his eyes. The tremor in his hands stopped. However long they had, they were not dead yet. And Yuna was looking for a way. That was enough. For now it had to be. He picked up his rifle and started cleaning it. A small, deliberate act of defiance in the flickering dark. The silence in the geothermal control room was thick and heavy, broken only by the drip of condensation and the low hum of a backup power cell. It was not a peaceful quiet. It was the quiet of a tomb waiting for its occupants. They had barricaded the main entrance with fallen machinery. The 9 of them, 6 humans, 3 Kthar, were now trapped together. The 4 rescued civilians huddled in a corner, shell-shocked. Yuna Lee sat apart, her engineer's eyes scanning the old control panels, her fingers tracing lines on a dusty schematic she had pulled from a drawer. The soldiers divided the last of their supplies. 2 packs of medical gel, for protein ration bars, 3 canisters of water, and a dwindling stack of power cells for their rifles. Taysan stood apart from the humans, conferring with his 2 remaining warriors in low, clicking tones. His rigid posture spoke of blame held tight. Finally, he turned. His voice was flat, devoid of its earlier fury, which was somehow worse. The transport would be in orbit now, he stated. The mission would be complete. My warriors would be alive. Your sentimental choice has killed us all, slowly instead of quickly. Jinwoo, checking the charge on his rifle, did not look up. The mission was to protect people. We protected 8. And condemned 9, Tae-san clicked back. And the 8 may not survive if that damaged ship is pursued. A net loss. Poor strategy. Sumin Kim snapped. The stress, the wound on her arm, the accusation. It boiled over. Strategy? You were going to let them be dissolved. To be turned into more of those things. That's not strategy, it's monstrosity. One of Tae-san's warriors took a step forward, a low hiss escaping its mandibles. The other humans tensed, hands going to weapons. The room felt ready to fracture. Enough, Jinwoo said, his voice quiet but slicing through the tension. He finally looked at Tae-san. You made your call. I made mine. We both have to live with the consequences. Arguing about the dead won't help the living. There is no help, Tae-san said. The hollow controls the surface. This hole will be our grave. We will starve or they will dig us out. From her corner, Yuna spoke up. Her voice was soft but clear. Maybe not. All eyes turned to her. She held up the old schematic. It was a map of the geothermal facility, showing deep injection wells and maintenance tunnels. This place wasn't just for power. They drilled deep, looking for stable thermal vents. Here. She pointed a grimy finger at a network of lines leading away from the main chamber. These are lava tubes, old cold ones. They were mapped but never used. Tae-san dismissed it with a sharp gesture of his claw. Tunnels. They will be filled with the enemy. These tubes lead west, for kilometers. Yuna persisted, her engineer's mind latching onto the problem, a distraction from the fear. The hollow is concentrated around the outpost, the energy signatures. If we go deep enough into the old, cold rock, we might slip past them. It comes out here near the old landing fields. A guess, Tae-san said. It's a chance, Jinwoo said, walking over to look at the map. He saw the logic. It was a desperate, dangerous path. Unstable, likely to collapse, with no guarantee the exit was clear. But it was a line on a map, and a line was better than a sealed box. Chance requires opportunity, Tae-san said. To reach these tubes, we would need to exit this room, cross the lower processing gallery, and access a maintenance hatch. Scans show the gallery is compromised. It is swarming with life signs, not chance.
Suicide.
Another silence fell, heavier than the last. The plan was stillborn. They had a possible path, but no way to reach the starting line. Jinwoo studied the map, then looked at the barricaded door. He looked at their few supplies. He looked at the faces of his team, exhausted, scared, but still watching him. He looked at Tae-san, who saw only the inevitable end. The division was no longer just between human and Kthar. It was between two ways of seeing the universe. One saw a wall and accepted it. The other saw a wall and looked for a crack, no matter how small. We need a diversion, Jinwoo said finally. Something to pull them out of the gallery. Tae-san's mandibles twitched. We have no assets.
No explosives. No drones.
We have noise, Sumin said quietly. She held up the nearly dead command tablet, its screen flickering. And we have this. The facility's emergency systems are on a separate loop. I might be able to trigger a full environmental alarm in the eastern wing. Flood it with light and sound. It could draw them away. It is a risk. They may not all go, Tae-san said. It's the only play we have, Jinwoo said. He wasn't asking for permission anymore. He was stating a fact. We try Yuna's path. Sumin makes the distraction. We move fast and quiet. We either find a way out or we die trying. But we die moving. He met Tae-san's gaze across the dim room. The alien warrior saw the resolve, the stubborn, illogical refusal to simply lie down. It was not courage as he understood it. It was a kind of madness, but it was the only madness available. After a long moment, Tae-san gave a single, sharp nod. Not of agreement, but of acknowledgement. The path was chosen. He turned to his warriors and began clicking orders, planning the formation for the sprint across the gallery. The alliance was broken, held together only by the thin, desperate thread of a line on an old map. They were no longer a unified force. They were just 9 living things, trapped in a hole, deciding to crawl towards a possible crack in the darkness. The darkness of the lower gallery was absolute, a thick blanket that swallowed the beams of their helmet lights. The air stank of sulfur and something else, a sweet, rotting smell that was the Hollow's signature. Every drip of water, every scrape of a boot on rock, sounded like a thunderclap. They moved in a tight, tense group. Taysan and one of his warriors took the lead, their compound eyes seeing heat shapes in the dark. Jinwoo and Sumin came next, herding the civilians between them. Yuna stayed close to Jinwoo, the map held tight in her mind. The last Kthar warrior and 2 human soldiers brought up the rear. Sumin's diversion had worked, but only partly. The blaring alarms and flashing lights in the east wing had pulled many of the life signs away. But not all. Shapes moved in the peripheral shadows, just outside the reach of their lights. The clicking was soft, but constant. "There," Yuna whispered, pointing a shaking finger. Her light landed on a rusted metal hatch set into the cavern wall, marked Maintenance Access T7. It was exactly where her map said it would be. Hope, thin and sharp, stabbed through the group. The lead Kthar warrior moved forward to examine the hatch. Its claw touched the locking wheel. The attack came from above. A pale, spidery form dropped from a ceiling vent directly onto the warrior's back. It was a scout, all needle legs and a whipping, barbed tail. The warrior let out a screech of pain and surprise, thrashing. Taysan spun, his plasma cutter firing a blinding line of blue. It missed the creature and sliced into his own warrior's carapace and the chaos. Jinwoo saw his chance. He lunged, not with his rifle, but with the stock of it, jamming it into the creature's central mass. It gave a wet crunch. The creature spasmed and fell off, but its work was done. The wounded Kthar warrior stumbled back, clicking in rapid, pained bursts. The spider thing's tail had struck deep into the joint where its upper limb met its body. Already, the area around the puncture was changing. The hard, glossy chitin was turning a dull gray, softening. Tiny, black tendrils, like veins of spoiled ink, were spreading out from the wound. Taysan went very still. The other Kthar warrior let out a low, mournful hiss. "Contamination," Taysan said, the word a death sentence. The wounded warrior understood. It looked at its own infection, then at its commander. It made a series of rapid, formal clicks, then stood straighter, accepting. "The protocol is clear," Taysan said, turning to Jinwoo, his voice devoid of all emotion. "The nanites are in its system. It will become a beacon, leading them to us. Then it will become one of them. It must be terminated before the change completes." He raised his plasma cutter, aiming at his own warrior's head. "Wait!" Jinwoo stepped forward, putting himself partially in the line of fire. Taysan's weapon did not waver. "Step aside, human. This is not your way. It is ours. It is mercy. It's killing," Sumin said, her medic's eyes fixed on the spreading corruption. "There has to be another way." "There is none," Taysan said, finality in every click. "The metal fragment is inside him. The assimilation cannot be stopped. You must leave him. We will seal this hatch behind us. It is the only way. Leave him." The echo of his own words in the hangar was not lost on Jinwoo. This was Taysan's brutal logic turned inward. Sacrifice the one for the many. A clean cut. Jinwoo looked at the wounded warrior. It stood silently, waiting for the end, a model of discipline. He looked at Sumin. Her face was pale, but her mind was working. Her eyes scanning the wound, the environment, the tools they had. "The geothermal cutter," she whispered suddenly, her voice tight with a horrific idea. She pointed to the far wall of the gallery. There, partly hidden by rubble, was a large industrial tool on a robotic arm. It was used for slicing through rock. Its focused thermal beam could cut through solid basalt. "What are you saying?" Jinwoo asked, though he already knew. The nanites, they start at the point of infection. They spread. If we remove the point of infection completely, Sumin's words trailed off. The solution was as terrible as the problem. Jinwoo understood. He turned to Tae-san. We can cauterize it. Cut the limb off at the joint. Seal the wound with pure heat. It might burn the nanites out. Tae-san stared, his weapon lowering a fraction. The idea was monstrous. It was a torture. It went against every code of a clean, honorable death. It is a cruelty. The chance of success is low. The pain will be immense. So is dying alone in the dark, Jinwoo said. He met Tae-san's gaze. You asked me why in the hangar. This is why. We don't leave people behind. And we don't execute them for being wounded. We try, even if it hurts. The wounded warrior made a soft click, looking at Tae-san, then at Jinwoo. It was not a plea. It was a question. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant, hungry click of the hollow. Tae-san looked from his loyal warrior to the determined, illogical humans. They were offering not a clean death, but a messy, painful, uncertain chance. It was everything his philosophy rejected. Slowly, he lowered his plasma cutter all the way. He gave a single, sharp nod to his warrior. The warrior, after a pause, nodded back. It was consent. Do it, Tae-san said, the words sounding like they were ripped from him. What followed was not medicine. It was butchery. It took 3 of them to hold the warrior still as Jinwoo, guided by Sumin's frantic instructions, maneuvered the heavy geothermal cutter into place. The beam activated with a searing white hum. The smell was unforgettable. The warrior did not scream in a human way. It emitted a high-frequency shriek of pure agony that vibrated in their teeth, before going utterly silent, its body going rigid with shock when it was done. A smoldering, sealed stump remained where the limb had been. The gray corruption had stopped spreading. The warrior was unconscious, alive, but broken. Tae-san stood over his soldier, then looked at Jinwoo, his expression unreadable in the dim light. The human had forced him to betray his own code, to inflict a horror for a mere chance. There was no gratitude in his eyes, only a deep, cold fury and a profound, unsettled confusion. The weight of the choice, of the terrible mercy, now hung between them, heavier than the mountain above their heads. The journey into the lava tubes was a descent into another kind of darkness. It was cold, damp, and tight, the walls pressing in on them. They moved in a ragged, exhausted line, their lights painting shaky circles on the rough, ancient rock. Jinwoo and one of the human soldiers carried the wounded Kthar warrior on a makeshift stretcher made from a torn thermal tarp and rifle straps. The warrior, whose name they learned was Kale, drifted in and out of a pained unconsciousness. Each jolt of the stretcher made its mandibles twitch. Tae-san walked just ahead of them, his own steps silent. He did not look back at his wounded soldier. He scanned the tunnels ahead with a fierce, unblinking focus. His silence was a wall. Sumin walked beside the stretcher, monitoring Kale's vital signs on a portable scanner, her face drawn with worry and fatigue. Yuna led the way, her map now committed to memory. She would stop, touch the wall, feel the direction of the faint, cold air current, and point. This way, she would say, her voice a whisper that echoed softly. For hours, there was only the sound of their breathing, their footsteps, and the distant, eternal drip of water. The oppressive silence of the hollow was gone, replaced by the silence of deep, dead stone. It was almost worse. It gave them time to think. Tae-san's thoughts were a storm of conflict. The humans' actions were a disease, an irrational contagion. In the hangar, it had cost them the transport. Here, it had turned a warrior's clean end into a screaming, mutilated survival. Kale was now a burden, slowing them, requiring resources. For what? To live as a cripple? The logic was absent. Yet, the human, Jinwoo, bore the weight of the stretcher without complaint. His face set in grim determination. It made no sense. Jinwoo's arms burned with the strain. His shoulder, where a hollow limb had grazed him earlier, throbbed in time with his heartbeat. He watched Tae-san's rigid back. He knew what the alien was thinking. He had seen that same cold calculation in the eyes of human commanders during brutal retreats long ago. The calculation that said a wounded man was a subtraction, not a person. His grandfather had been left behind by that math. Jinwoo shifted his grip on the stretcher pole, his jaw tight. They stopped in a wider chamber where the tube split into two. Yuna consulted her scanner, frowning. The left branch slopes downward more. The right is narrower. The map is unclear here. They needed to rest. They set the stretcher down gently. Sumin gave Kale a few drops of water. The Kthar warrior's eyes flickered open. They focused with difficulty on Tae-san, who stood looking down the right-hand tunnel. Kale made a series of weak, soft clicks. A report, an apology for his condition. Tae-san did not turn around. He simply gave a single, sharp click in acknowledgement. Dismissal.it was too much for Jinwoo. The exhaustion, the pain, the silent condemnation. "He's talking to you?" Jinwoo said, his voice rough in the quiet cave. Tae-san slowly turned. "He is reporting. It is not required. He's your soldier. He followed you. He's lying here because he took a hit that might have been meant for you." Jinwoo's words echoed off the stone. "And he will die here because of your rule." Tae-san clicked back, the wall of his silence finally breaking. "Your do not leave rule. It is a chain. It drags everyone down. First the civilians, now him. Soon all of us. You trade a certain honorable death for a slow, shameful one in the dark." "Honorable." Jinwoo took a step forward. "You call putting a plasma bolt in his head honorable? That's just clean. It's easy. Carrying him, fighting for him, that's hard. That's what honor costs. It's not a word you say before you kill someone. It's the pain you carry so they don't have to die alone." The other soldiers, Human and Kthar, watched tensely. This was the true battle, the one that had been brewing since the hangar door. Tae-san gestured at Kale's smoldering stump. "You call this honor? This mutilation? I call it a chance." Jinwoo's shout bounced through the tunnels. He lowered his voice, forcing control. "My grandfather was a soldier. He was left behind on a frozen mountain. His friends turned to ice, waiting for a rescue that was calculated to be too expensive. They were just numbers, subtractions. He carried that cold inside him for the rest of his life. We swore to never be that kind of people. The kind that does the easy math. We carry the weight or we become the cold. We carry him." He pointed at Kale. "Because he's not a number. He's one of us." The cave fell silent again, but the air was different now. The unspoken conflict was spoken, laid bare on the cold rock between them. Tae-san stared at Jinwoo. He heard the words, but more than that, he felt the raw, illogical conviction behind them. It was not strategy. It was a belief, a terrible, burdensome faith. He looked at Kale, who was watching him, waiting. He saw not a broken tool, but a warrior who had endured unimaginable pain at his commander's order. An order he had given because the human had refused the simpler path. He looked at the humans, exhausted, scared, but still here, still carrying. Slowly, Tae-san walked over to the stretcher. He knelt, an awkward movement for his angular body. He did not speak. He simply placed a clawed hand on Kale's uninjured shoulder and held it there for a long moment. It was not a human gesture of comfort. It was a Kthar gesture of connection, of shared burden. When he stood, his voice was different. The fury was gone, replaced by a weary, haunted tone. "The right tunnel," he said to Yuna, not looking at Jinwoo. "It is narrower. It will be harder with the stretcher, but it angles upward, towards the surface." He moved to the front of the stretcher and took one of the carrying poles from the tired human soldier. He did not say thank you. He did not agree, but his action was clear. He would help carry the weight. A faint, gray light began to seep into the darkness. It was not the glow of their helmet lamps, but something else. Filtered, dusty, and real. The air changed, too. The stale, mineral smell of the deep tunnels gave way to a faint, cold breeze that carried the scent of ozone and burnt metal. "The surface?" Yuna whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. They pushed forward. their exhaustion forgotten in a final surge of desperate hope. The narrow lava tube widened into a rough, natural cave mouth, choked with scrubby, gray vegetation. They crawled out one by one into the dim twilight of Seriphus. They were on a rocky slope overlooking a vast, scarred plain. In the distance, they could see the smoking ruins of Outpost Haven. But their eyes were drawn to the sky. High above, holding a geosynchronous orbit, was the distinct, angular shape of an Alliance frigate. Jinwoo fumbled for his comms unit, its power cell almost dead. "This is Sergeant Jinwoo Park, Earth Allied Forces, survivor of Haven. Requesting immediate extraction. Coordinates following." He sent the data from Yuna's scanner that a crackling, beautiful voice filled his ear. "Copy, Sergeant. Signal received. Hold position."
Dropship en route.
3 minutes. They had done it. They had escaped the mountain. They sank to the ground, too tired to cheer, simply breathing the cold, free air. Was then that the ground behind them, at the cave mouth, erupted. The hollow had not given up. A patrol, perhaps drawn by their final comms burst or their heat signatures, had found the other end of the tunnel. A dozen of the smaller, faster constructs scrabbled out of the darkness, clicking and skittering over the rocks, their metallic limbs flashing. They were exhausted, out of position, and nearly out of ammunition. The civilians screamed and scrambled back. The human soldiers raised their rifles, but their power cells flickered red, empty. Taesan moved. He and his one able-bodied warrior placed themselves between the enemy and the group, their own weapons spitting plasma. But they were two, and the line was too wide. The hollow began to flank them, moving with predatory speed. From his makeshift stretcher, Kale stirred, his eyes fixed on the advancing enemy on the left flank, where a human soldier was trying to fight with a knife. Kale's working arm shot out and grabbed Taysen's leg. He made a rapid series of clicks, his voice weak but urgent. Taysan looked down, then followed Kale's gaze. He understood. He gave a sharp, commanding click to his other warrior. Then he did something extraordinary. He turned his back on his own warrior and the main fight. He trusted his soldier to hold the center. He trusted the humans to hold the right. And he lunged to the left, placing himself directly in the path of the flanking hollow, covering the exposed human soldier. "Jinwoo, the right!" Taysan shouted, not in his own language, but in the human tongue. Jinwoo, understanding, shoved his useless rifle into Yuna's hands and grabbed a fallen rock. He and Sumin stood shoulder to shoulder with the last human soldier, forming a brittle wall against the scrabbling creatures on the right, armed with nothing but stones and desperation. The battle was a short, brutal clash in the dirt. Taysan fought with a silent fury, his claws and plasma cutter tearing into the biomechanical horrors. He was not fighting for strategy anymore. He was fighting for the ones at his back. The thunderous roar of engines shook the sky. The dropship descended like an angry god, its forward guns blazing. Lines of explosive fire stitched across the slope, vaporizing the hollow constructs in flashes of light and smoke. In moments, it was over. The ship landed, its ramp dropping. Medics rushed out as the survivors were helped aboard. Jinwoo stood by the ramp, watching. He saw Sumin guiding the civilians. He saw Yuna looking back at the cave with wide eyes. He saw the medics carefully lifting Kale's stretcher. Taysan walked up beside him. The alien warrior was scored with fresh burns, his carapace chipped. He watched his wounded soldier being carried onto the ship that represented survival. A ship they had lost because of the man beside him. He turned to Jinwoo. The question from the caves was still there, but the fury was gone, burned away in the final fight. "Why?" Taysan asked again, simply. The cost was too high, twice. Jinwoo looked at the frigate in the sky, at the wounded being loaded, at the faces of the people who had carried and been carried. He did not speak of philosophy or grand ideals. "Because a soldier is not a tool to be discarded," Jinwoo said, his voice quiet against the wind. "A people is not a number to be subtracted. My grandfather watched his friends freeze into statues on a mountain, waiting for a country that calculated they weren't worth retrieving. We swore to never make that calculation again. He finally looked at Taysan. We carry the weight, or we become the cold. Taysan was silent for a long time. He looked at his own claw, then at the missing limb of his warrior, now safely inside the ship. He looked at the humans, who bore the fresh wounds of the last fight, wounds taken defending his flank that he had believed the humans' rule was a chain. Now he felt its true nature. It was not a chain that dragged you down. It was a line, a tether, that pulled you forward when you wanted to fall. It was the reason the human had refused to leave the civilians, and the reason he, Taysan, had refused to abandon the flank. It was the same reason he did not say he understood. He did not say thank you. He simply gave a slow, deep nod of his head, a gesture of profound respect. Then he turned and walked up the ramp into the ship, standing guard beside Kale's stretcher as the medics worked. Jinwoo took one last look at the dark cave mouth, then at the gray sky. The cold was outside on the wind. It was not inside him. He turned and followed the others aboard.